Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Power of Man podcast. My name is Rory Paquette. I am, as always, your grateful host. Thank you so much for being here today. This is the best job anybody could have, sitting right here in this chair, talking to you wonderful people. Before we get going today, I do absolutely have to say thank you to everybody. One of our last episodes with Josh Bracco, you folks, the outpouring of support, not only here to us at Power Man, but also to Josh directly through all of his contact links that he left you, was just out otherworldly the way it happened. Josh has been communicating with me with everything that you guys have been reaching out to him about, all the offers you've made to help him out and everything else. It really was unbelievable. You're a great group of people, and you made me very proud to have built what we have here today. So thank you for that. Before we bring this gentleman on, and I mean, he is hustling right now. He had to stop at a Starbucks to jump on in order to do this because this guy is so busy following his purpose and going after, everything that he's got to do. But if you're a friend of the program, you know what we have to do first, right? Got to take a sip of that preferred beverage. Oh, yes, absolutely. Oh, folks, and you know what? If you're a friend of the program, you know what we're drinking. That's right. It's Freedom Hill Coffee. Freedom Hill Coffee at Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram. Deep, dark, rich, bold, and beautiful, just like my wife. Folks, they do all the right things for all the right reasons. They brew a mean cup of joe and they support veterans, which is why we here at Power Man support them. Look them up on Instagram at Freedom Hill Coffee. Tell them Power Man sent you. You'll be glad you did. All right, now that we've paid the bills, let's move on. We have an incredible guest with us today. I'm not going to introduce him with anything other than his name because we need to talk about this right off the bat. And please welcome to the program, Tanawah Downing. How you doing, sir?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, brother. Thanks
All
so
right.
much.
Appreciate you coming on. Now, I asked you how to introduce you, and one of the very first conversations we had was, I said, "Are you an attorney?" And then you explained that there's a big difference between what you do and being that. So you know what? Go for it. Let everybody know.
Yeah. So, a lot of people don't understand that there's a difference between an advocate and an attorney. See, it all boils down to our education and what we learn. So, attorneys, they go through what's called adjudicative law. They learn about the adjudication process. They learn how to make a person into a criminal. So, they learn about all the laws that remove freedom, ordinances, statutes, customs, judgment, rules. These are all things that remove freedom in order to make a person into a criminal. An advocate, however, is a person that speaks on behalf of others in a legal manner. And so I'm an advocate. I went through substantive law. I went through all I studied was just the Constitution, laws of the United States. You see, I'm in the business of restoring freedom. They're in the business of removing freedom. An advocate is much different from an attorney. I'm not an attorney. I'm a civil rights advocate and litigator, and I'm litigating now the biggest case in American history on behalf of people in the United States, the deprivation of rights and freedoms that have been caused from them by this government. And I can't wait to tell your listeners about this case.
Okay, that's absolutely fantastic. I'm looking forward to digging into this and taking a big bite because what you're talking about right now is fascinating. When we first talked, anything that backs the Constitution to me is vitally important. And I
Yeah.
mean, I can just meeting you for like 2 minutes, I can feel your passion for what you're dealing with coming right through the screen at me.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to kind of just let you loose. Do me a favor before we get into the actual what it is you're doing, because that's going to take a bulk of our time. Give
Yeah.
everybody an idea of, who Tanawah is and and
Yeah.
and what led you to this point in the first place.
Absolutely. So, sometimes in order to help others, you have to suffer alongside them. And that's just God's way of preparing us. So, we all have a reality, and that reality is based upon our experience. So in order for you to understand the reality of justice, you have to experience it. And if I were to say to you that there's racism in the world, you can't understand it unless you've experienced it. So that's why two people can literally be standing side by side each other and yet have a vastly differing perspective of what's real and what's not, because it's all based upon our experience. So 9 years ago, I was on the other side. I was very high up in government. I was designing and deploying systems that were focused on what we call national security. But through a series of just tragic events in my life, the result of a divorce, a very, very painful divorce that I didn't want and didn't really understand, and coming to understand my own failures as a man, that led to to that divorce, I started suffering. And I'm telling you that in my suffering, there were a number of people that just suddenly appeared that weren't real before. You see, I couldn't see through the eyes of the homeless and the eyes of the drug user or the prostitute because I couldn't experience what or understand what their experience was. That homeless person to me was homeless because he was lazy. It wasn't because there were 90,000 limitations placed upon him by a system that intends to keep him in a state of oppression. And I didn't understand that drug addict was there because he was sad and because no one cared about the trauma that had been inflicted upon him, over years of. And so now, once these people appeared, and I realized that the things that I believed in, the things that I fought for, and the things that I had actually advocated and established, they were all hurting the people of the United States. I had to do something about it. There was never a choice. So, for me, this has been just an amazing journey of becoming a man and a father, because, I thought that I was doing things right. But as I realized that I was not, and that, Homeland Security was simply code word for domestic terrorism, and that I myself was abridging the very obligations that I said by oath that I would fulfill and promise to people of the United States, I had to do something about it. So, God had to lead me down a very, very painful path in order to bring me back to do the things I'm doing right now. Because, if my son is going to look to me as his hero, then I damn well better step up and do something heroic. And if I'm going to be proud of the man that he becomes, then I first have to be proud of that man that he emulates. And for my daughters, I came to understand that I was going to be their first love, and they were going to be looking to me as the example for who it was that they were going to give their hearts to. And if I'm going to be happy with the men that they choose, I must first be the type of man that I would approve for them. So it's been painful to reach this point, but it's been absolutely the most amazing journey that anyone could ever be a part of. Because these people of the United States, they're not getting the protection that they need. They're not being given the things that they've been promised by their birthright, by our forefathers and founders. And that's because we have a system that doesn't understand their role in an honorable system. It doesn't understand their role in protecting the rights and freedoms of the people, as opposed to enslaving them or profiting off of them. And I'm out here making sure that those leaders understand that if you want to call yourself honorable, then your actions must be honorable. And today they're not, because the Constitution for the United States of America, that provides the overarching requirements that every state must follow. I don't think that anyone who went through basic civics classes would not understand that concept. So when the Constitution identifies very specific procedures and processes for the adjudication of a crime, and those processes are there in order to preserve the individual liberties of the people through the limiting of the powers of government, those states must follow those procedures. And when they don't, what they produce is unconstitutional. So we have a litigation right now against 39 states across the country. There are 13 states that do not follow the basic procedures and processes established and codified in the Constitution of the United States of America in the adjudication of crime. What that means is that every single person that those states have prosecuted are completely void, without force or effect, because the states did not follow the rules in doing it. And so our litigation is against the state of Washington, primarily. We only have to beat them, but I'm enjoining the rest. I'll tell you what that means in just one moment.
All right.
But let me lay this out for you. Go ahead, brother. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, I was just saying, okay. I mean, I'm already fascinated with what we're dealing with here. So now we're into the meat of what it is you're doing and why you're traveling all over the country. So go
Right.
ahead and tell everybody what it is you're doing.
So again, the Constitution of the United States of America, it identifies the procedures that must be followed in order to find someone guilty. Clause 1 of Amendment 5 to the United States Constitution says, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on presentment or indictment of a grand jury. Now that's clear. You got to have an indictment by a grand jury before arresting someone and holding them over for a capital or an infamous crime. Now, a capital crime is any crime that it results in a death, right? Or is punishable by a death. That's pretty clear. Those are simple. But an infamous crime, we got to go to Title 18, subsection 4083 to determine what an infamous crime is. An infamous crime is any crime punishable by more than 1 year imprisonment in a penitentiary. So if you can get more than 1 year, that would be an infamous crime. So every felony is infamous. Many gross misdemeanors are infamous, and it's not the amount of time that you get sentenced to, but the amount of time that you can be sentenced to, because the constitutional provision says you cannot be arrested and held without indictment by grand jury. So the infamous nature is determined by the amount of time that you can be sentenced to, not the amount of time that you get sentenced to. because the sentencing comes long after the arrest. So now we understand what an infamous crime is. It's
Okay.
any crime punishable by more than 1 year imprisonment and penitentiary. So Article 1, Section 26 of Washington State's Constitution, inferior law, states no grand jury shall be drawn or summoned in any county. So now we have a provision in an inferior state constitution that functions directly to the contrary of the United States Constitution. Now we got a supremacy issue, and now we have to determine which law is supreme. Now, when I started this litigation 9 years ago, when I went into this full time, and I decided that I was no longer going to be protecting the government from the people, and I was going to start protecting people from government, and actually went into civil rights litigation and advocacy full time. I didn't realize how big this case actually was. I thought that it was fairly localized. I could not imagine that multiple states would be doing this outright defiant process that is against the Constitution of the United States, outright defiant to it. The problem is that there's 13 states right now that do not conduct a grand jury, despite the fact that it is required by the Constitution in the adjudication of crimes. That means that when they decide to perform an arrest without having an indictment by a grand jury consistent with the constitutional parameters, that means that arrest is unconstitutional. And that means that everything that derives from that arrest must also be unconstitutional, because they're all tainted by the illegality of the way in which is obtained. You cannot obtain a constitutional conviction as a result of an unconstitutional arrest. It can't happen. And so, again, this is a big deal, and it affects a lot of people. Currently, today, right now, there are more than 700,000 people currently imprisoned across America on direct facial constitutional violations because the states didn't follow the proper rules in putting them there. And for me, coming to meet a lot of these people and having the privilege of being able to be able to get to know their families, I can honestly say that the way that we're treating the people of the United States, there's a much better way to deal with the issue of morality. You see, what we're doing is we're taking people that are hurting, and we're placing them in a more hurtful situation and expecting them to get healed. And that's not how it works. This is an institution that has built itself upon the slavery practice, because here in America, we believe that slavery does not exist. We believe that it was abolished after the Civil War, after 1 million people died and fought in the battle for equality. And then we enacted an amendment to our Constitution that says slavery doesn't exist. And the American people were led to believe that that's true, but it's not. Because if you were to read the 13th Amendment, the very amendment to the United States Constitution that guarantees and was supposed to abolish slavery, it did nothing of the sort. Not only does it permit slavery, but it codified the legality of it within our foundational law. Because what the 13th Amendment says is, it says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist except as punishment for crime. And the moment you say except, it means that you can't have slavery. But we have to call it justice here in America. So we simply took something, we retitled it something different. We changed it from a private institution to a public institution, and we told America that it doesn't exist. But it does. That is what has led to mass incarceration and the fact that we have an 800% increase in the prison population today. That's why we have 16 times more prisoners here in America than the next closest industrialized nation. That's why we have 5% of the world's human population, but 26% of the world's prison population, is because these states have realized they can make tens of billions of dollars off the forced involuntary servitude of the weakest and most vulnerable in society under the auspice of justice. And all they have to do is call them a criminal, and they can do such that. So we have for-profit private organizations, such as in case of the state of Florida, where we have General Dynamics, who is a defense contractor for the United States of America, who are leasing out prisoners and employing those prisoners to build their chipset for their fighter jets. Those prisoners don't get paid a cent to do that. We have the same prisoners that are answering the help desk phone for Northrop Grumman, another for-profit defense contractor. We have a female prisoner in Georgia that is sewing the tags on Victoria's Secret underwear. They don't get paid a cent to do that. We have prisoners in Texas that are making the hamburger patties for McDonald's. They don't get paid a cent to do that. Brother, that's not an issue of morality. That's a matter of slavery. And we need to get this addressed, because we point at China and Korea and we call them uncivilized because they take their own people and put them in these abusive, oppressive conditions so they can make T-shirts and sweatshirts for 30 cents an hour. But we're doing the same thing, only we call it justice. Not justice. That's slavery. So for me, this is a matter of, I want to help these people get healed from the trauma that's been inflicted upon them by an institution that has acted unconstitutionally and illegally for 243 years and has led the people astray because they want to proliferate their industry and profit off their illegal acts. And I think that it's time for the American people to understand that what they believe in is not real, but
Yeah.
it can be, and it depends
So
on what we're going to believe in.
yeah,
Yeah,
just for a second, because,
yeah.
I
Huh?
consider myself, to be a fairly knowledgeable guy. I pay attention to what's going on, and, I'm certainly not a scholar or anything like that, but I've never heard of any of this before. Why do you suppose that is? That it's not being talked about at all anywhere, even with you going state to state launching lawsuits.
So the reason why is because this is a for profit organization, this is a for profit business, and they're making a lot of money. Um, you know, a lot of people have said that to me, and that's largely the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. Is that we got to find a way to get this information out. As long as they ignore this information, they're going to continue to do it. And in fact, the Supreme Court of the United States, we brought this to their attention. You can't go around the country serving 39 state Supreme Courts and 39 state attorney generals and 100 United States senators and not have your name on a list. They know exactly what I'm doing, and and the fact that they're ignoring it, we got to remember that when the people are silent, we give our consent and we permit government to do things to us that they would not otherwise be able to do because we don't speak up and speak out and demand that they do it right. But when government is silent, that is an indication of its guilt because there is no right to self-defense for public officials. There is no right to justifying a constitutional violation. So there's a maximum law that exists that says any act unconstitutional at the beginning cannot become constitutional over time or by subsequent legislation.
Hmm.
So as long as government is failing to follow the very basic procedures and processes in the adjudication of crime, there is no justification whatsoever in the outcome that they produced. They don't want this to come forward. Whether they knew about it or not prior to me bringing this litigation forward, I don't know. I can't say. But what I can say is that this is going to cost government a lot of money. This is going to cost government a lot of their credibility, right? Because we have an institution called the United States Supreme Court, who is 100%, without a doubt, responsible for all of this, completely responsible. We have an institution that was put into place to preserve, protect, and defend the laws of the United States, the Constitution of the United States. That was the sole purpose in the establishment of that institution. And they are absolutely responsible for all of this. And the reason why is because of the first 28 justices that served on our Supreme Court, 22 of them owned their own slaves. 22 of them. So what they did was, if you can imagine, the Constitution preserves the liberty of the people. The Constitution has declared that all men are to be free. And yet we had 22 of the first 28 Supreme Court justices who wanted the advancement of this industry, who didn't want to see it shut down. And so what happened was that early on, they started putting into place rulings. Now remember, judges make rulings. They have no authority whatsoever to legislate. They have no action with regard to law. All legislative power, according to the Constitution, is vested in the Congress of the United States. That's the only branch that can create, amend, or destroy law.
Right.
Anything associated with law is legislation. And we delegated that authority to the Congress and only the Congress. You see, the executive branch, they don't get to deal with law either. They deal with orders, executive orders. But orders must be consistent with the law because the executive branch has no authority to legislate. And the judicial branch, they don't have the authority to create law either because you may not legislate from the bench. They can only make rulings, but their rulings must be consistent with the positive law because judges are tethered to positive law. But yet we had a Supreme Court for over a number of years, starting from the very beginning, all the way until the turn of the 19th century. We were into 1920. We had a number of justices that were either slave owners themselves or sympathetic to the slave institution, and what they did was they put into place a number of rulings that directly undermined the laws of the United States, such as the one that we're dealing with right now, a case called Hurtado versus California. So in Hurtado versus California from 1887, this was the Wake Court. And the Wake Court was well known for misreading the law. They actually believed that they were responsible for the law. They brought into place something that was known as legal realism. which is the belief that law is not based upon a formal set of rules or principles, but instead upon judicial decisions that derive from their own social, political, or public policy. They believe that that's where law came from, was that judges made the law. So what they did was again, the Constitution requires an indictment by a grand jury. They require it. And so then they went out and they created a ruling that California had actually created something known as information. Now, information is not an indictment. What information does is information is an affidavit. And an affidavit at common law is considered truth. So what they do is they go out and they collect information from an accuser. If someone calls up the police and says something happened to them, that officer then takes that information, reduces it to writing in the form of an affidavit, and then they present it to a judge, who then makes a determination whether or not there's sufficient probable cause to assume that a crime has been committed. Okay. But unfortunately, that judge works for the very same body of men as does that officer, as does the prosecutor, as does the ones that are profiting off of the involuntary servitude once they actually make the person into a criminal. So there's no neutral, unbiased decision maker to review the state's case or the accusations to determine whether or not they're exceeding the authority statutorily conferred upon them by the Constitution. That is the role of the grand jury. You see, normally the information would be received, and then that accuser would have to come in and present the accusation in front of a neutral, unbiased decision maker known as the grand jury. 16 to 23 persons that are going to review the state's case, review the accusation from the accuser, give the defendant the opportunity to be able to confront those hearsay evidence that was against them prior to being arrested and held over for that offense. But in the case of information, when you present that information as though it's factual, such as an officer does, that officer actually brings that information, presents it as though it's truth, because that officer will take the information for the accuser and then present it to the judge under their own oath, saying that this information is factual, truthful, and correct. And therefore, that officer has no idea whether it is or not is not, because they were not a witness, but yet they present it as fact to that judge, and then that judge says, okay, we have sufficient evidence to assume that the crime has been committed, and then they order the arrest. And now that defendant has no opportunity to be able to confront that information that's against them. They have no opportunity to be able to present their counter argument to that hearsay evidence, and now they're being arrested, deprived of their liberty, deprived of their right to be able to use their property, take care of their family, earn money. All these things that were supposed to be protected, they don't have the ability to do it anymore. Now they're being arrested. And it sets up what is known as an irrebuttable presumption of guilt. Now, an irrebuttable presumption of guilt is when you are presumed to be guilty based upon the mere fact of being charged with a crime. You're being arrested, and you're being presumed that you're guilty because you're being charged with a crime. And now all those rights that are supposed to be protected by due process are being deprived of you because you can't put that information on stand and cross-examine it. When you don't have the opportunity to rebut an accusation against you, then your right to be able to be free, it evaporates, because you cannot put that information on a stand, cross-examine it. Information and affidavit is considered truth at common law. Sure. So now what happens is what is known as there's a shift in the burden of proof. So normally what we all believe here in America is that prosecutor has to prove that you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, right? And that you're innocent until proven guilty. But not with an irrebuttable presumption of guilt. With an irrebuttable presumption of guilt, the burden of proof shifts, and it's now the defendant that has to go out and collect evidence to prove that they're innocent, which means it's the prosecutor no longer has to prove that you're guilty. And now we have a situation where the defendant literally has to be guilty until proven innocent, and it's a burden upon them to prove that they're innocent because the prosecutor no longer has to prove that you're guilty. And this burden of proof, according to Blackstone, this occurs when the system focuses on speed and efficiency as opposed to established procedures and processes. We have an absolute breakdown due process that's occurring prolifically across this country that's affecting hundreds of thousands and perhaps even millions of people. And we need to get this addressed, because this is not a fair, just system. This is a system that is focused on speed and efficiency by abridging the very procedures and processes that we're entitled by our birthright, codified in that Constitution, by the very institution that was established, set up to preserve and protect it. They put into place rulings that fundamentally changed the intent of the Constitution by removing what we would call the Constitution and putting into place their rulings that the judicial branch erroneously called law, case law. So when the Supreme Court of the United States said, California, You don't have to do what the Constitution says. Well, unfortunately, Supreme Court, you had no authority to be able to alter, amend, or destroy any of the provisions, guarantees of the Constitution. That would be unconstitutional. So when you did in 1887, when you did remove the guarantees and protections, privileges of the Constitution of the United States, and you put into place your ruling that you erroneously called case law, judges don't get to create law. What you did was unconstitutional, and then you directed all the states to follow your law that is unconstitutional. And now we have a situation where these states believe that they don't have to do what the Constitution of the United States guarantees. And that would be unconstitutional because those laws that the states created that relied upon what the judges created, it's all unconstitutional, which means that every single contract that was created by these states that relied upon that unconstitutional state law, that relied upon the unconstitutional ruling that was erroneously called law, that fundamentally changed the Constitution, every one of them are unconstitutional. So we're challenging the United States Supreme Court in their own venue to say, you know what, Supreme Court, all this shit that you built, all this stuff that you put into place, that you had no authority to be able to will against the people so you can advance your business and your industry, so you can profit off your illegal acts. We want it all taken away. We want that Constitution put back in its foundation. We want the people to be guaranteed the very freedoms and rights that they're, and I want you to get out of the business of enslaving the people. And we want to get into the business of helping these people because all these people are hurting, and they're hurting because of the things that this institution is doing. Today, we have more than 12 million children that have been robbed from their families through the CPS system. Those children, right? Most people would think, okay, well, obviously they're being removed for a reason. But you know what? There is today a financial incentive for the removal of children under the Title 40 Social Security Act. For every child that you remove from the love and care of their family as a state, you get hundreds of thousands of dollars initially from the federal government for that removal. But what no one's talking about is that every single child that's removed from the love and care of their family, they have an 80% likelihood of going to prison over their lifetime. The system knows that, and it is creating a long-term self-sustaining product. And that's the problem that I have, is that every single person that's in prison today, every single one of them is someone's child, and you're not going to mess with our family any longer. We're going to preserve our family. We're going to protect it. And honestly, this should have been the first act of our government, not the last. This should have been protected. Our family should have been protected from the very beginning, and it wasn't. So we're going to make sure that they're protected from here on out. That's what we're doing. Thank you.
I mean, no, not at all. I appreciate the way you laid that out. And I was wondering where you were going with the Child Protective Services angle, but now I get it. Basically, from the get, they are, breeding people and filling the pipeline for folks who are going to come out and end up in prison, is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, it's my limited understanding, of course, that there has to be some injured party or something that is the one bringing the suit. Is that correct?
There must be an injured party, and unfortunately, when the state is the injured party, there is none because you don't have the ability to confront the state. The state claims immunity, right? But when and that is actually the heart of our litigation.
Okay.
The indictment is getting us in the door, right? The indictment's that's easy. It's written right there in the Constitution. You got to have it. You didn't have it. Therefore, all of these convictions are all facially unconstitutional. That's easy. That's the low-hanging fruit. But the real argument is Article 3, because Article 3 creates the jurisdiction of the courts. And what Article 3 says, it says in all cases in which a state shall be party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. Now, it wasn't referring to a state Supreme Court because they didn't exist, right? It was referring to the United States Supreme Court. So in all cases in which a state shall be party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. Now, original jurisdiction is what court acts first. No other court in the country can act before the court has original jurisdiction. So if a state is a party in a cause, the United States Supreme Court has original jurisdiction because that judge has a conflict of interest. He works for the plaintiff. And this was litigated in 1793 successfully under a case called Chisholm versus Georgia. We're just doing it again because all of these cases across the country, they're all state of whatever versus you. And that is unconstitutional because that state does not have jurisdiction to oversee the case in which it itself is a party in the cause. You see, anytime that a state brings an accusation against you through any one of its agents, be it CPS, be it law enforcement, be it a prosecuting attorney, if the state brings an accusation against you through any one of its agents, that state may not be judging the case, and that judge has a constitutional obligation to recuse himself, codified in Article 3, upheld by James Madison, written by in Federalist Number 10, written by Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist Number 80, written by John Jay, the first Chief Justice in Martin v. Sanchez Lessee, and written by the United States Judicial Code, Title 28, subsection 455. Judges may not be judged in a case in which their own employer is the plaintiff, and yet here we are today, where judges, prosecutors, law enforcement, they're all part of the same body of men that make up the accuser, and then they're all going to profit off of the illegal acts that's being performed by them. So we're litigating that particular issue. That's the big argument that we have, and that we're going to be successfully win. But it derives from this issue of indictments and then the underlying motivations of the system itself.
And so you have to go to each. I mean, you mentioned that one of the reasons you're on the road right now is because you're going from state to state and delivering things and so on. You have to go to each state's capital to serve the state. I mean,
Yeah, it's a tedious process because I'm the primary litigator and I can't sue a different state, right? That's 11th Amendment. A citizen in one state cannot sue a different state. So I can't bring suit against, I mean, I'm in North Carolina right now. We're on our way up, but I can't sue the state of South Carolina because I don't live there. But there are people within that state that are affected in the same way that this litigation would do. So I could beat the state of Washington. I could beat them at any moment. But in order to have a class action, in order to ensure that the people all across the country benefit from the litigation I'm doing, benefit from the work that I'm doing, I want to make sure that all the states are equally notified. And so, again, I can't sue the state of South Carolina, but I have an affiant there that can, because this has happened to him. And so in the same procedure, and so by bringing him and me collecting that affidavit and me serving on his behalf, the state, now that state has been notified of criminal acts that their agents are committing. And so another thing is that instead of going around the state and suing every single judge or notifying every judge or every single prosecutor, I'm just going to the boss, because the state attorney general is the leader of all the highest executive officer, and they're leading all the prosecutors. The state Supreme Court is leading all the judges. So when I serve one of their agents, let's say, for instance, the state Supreme Court will be served through their clerk of court. When I provide an affidavit on behalf of a person within that state that has had crimes committed against them by agents of that state, by agents of their branch, that Supreme Court has a duty and responsibility to direct their agents to act in a lawful manner and stop committing crimes. And if they don't, then by their failure to take action, they will have implicated all of their agents. So notice to agent is notice to principal, but notice to principal is notice to agent. So I'm not serving all the independent judges and prosecutors. I'm serving their boss. I'm giving their boss an opportunity to be able to correct the unlawful acts. And if they don't, then all the agents have been served. And today, right now, we've got 39 states that we've served between May and now, giving them ample opportunity to respond and correct the illegal and unlawful acts of their agents. And they've all chosen to do nothing about it, chosen to ignore this. We've also served all 100 of the United States senators, and I've served 250 of the United States congressmen, the representatives. And so we have a massive number of people that had a duty to correct the unlawful acts of their agents, had a duty and an obligation to preserve the Constitution of the United States, who all chose to do nothing about it and ignore it. And just because you pretend like something doesn't exist doesn't make it cease to exist. The law of criminal conspiracy, as it applies to public officials, it says, any person who, having knowledge of any of the wrongs conspire to be done, and who have the power to prevent or aid in the prevention of the commission of same, neglects or refuses to do so, may be joined to dispense the action. Upon having provided notice on official service to the state attorney generals, to the state Supreme Courts, they've been notified. They have the power to prevent. They have the power to take action to prevent these crimes from continuing to occur. And they've chosen to do nothing about it. And as a result, we have a massive number of people that would be automatic recusal for these cases. And that means that there isn't a single attorney general or prosecutor or attorney within these states or judge that would be able to oversee this particular dispute. So we're eliminating the ability for states to be able to deal with this issue and make it so that Supreme Court, you don't have a choice anymore. You don't get to tell us to go to any other court. You don't get to tell us that you're not going to hear this. You have to address this issue, because these are your agents that work for you that are committing these crimes under your watch, because your institution directed them in 1887 that they don't have to follow the Constitution. And as long as you ignore this, then all of these courts within your purview are breaking the law, committing treasonous acts because you directed them to do it. We want that court to step up because it's the one that's ignoring us. Because we provided notice to them. I served them on September 29th, 2023 of this issue. They've chosen to do nothing about it. They refused to docket my case and give us a docket number. And then we have Justice Gorsuch, who's one of the United States justices, Supreme Court justice, who's actually written a book. He's talking about everything I'm saying here. He's going out and he's having press interviews where he's agreeing with everything I'm saying, and yet he's not doing what's necessary to fix the problem because those were his agents. They work for him. And a good leader is going to step up and say, I'm going to lead you by example. I'm going to lead us into lawfulness. I don't care how big it is. I don't care how many times it's been done. You could go around the country and you could point your finger at your agents and say, you guys are committing crimes. Or you could step up and be a leader and you could lead them in a lawful direction by writing an edict that directs all of your agents to act lawfully, because you only have to have one justice produce an edict. If one justice decides that they want to obey the Constitution, they can write an edict that will require every single judge in the entire country to obey the law. And so rather than talking about it, I challenge Mr. Gorsuch to step up and be about it. Be a man, direct your agents to act in a lawful manner. And if you don't, then you have provided notice and knowledge through a book, through multiple press conferences saying that you're aware that these people are committing crimes. And yet you chose to do nothing about it, which means that I will absolutely be including you as a defendant in this action once we reach that point of being heard.
I thought that was coming. The way you were leading that up, I thought that was coming. Okay. Let me ask you this, just my lack of law knowledge, but now if you get one of these cases in front of the Supreme Court, which is your goal, and the Supreme Court decides on one, and that sets a precedent, then does that then impact all the other cases, or do you have to actually, because of the individual state constitutions, go and hear and try and win each case?
So what happens with preemption, which is what we're dealing with? Preemption is when there's a disjoining of laws. We have a superior law, the Constitution of the United States, and then we have an inferior law that is contrary to it. When you deal with preemption, you have to first determine which law is supreme. Once you make that determination, then what happens is you must remove the inferior state constitutional provision. You must remove it. And then you must replace it with the correct constitutional provision. And remember, laws that are unconstitutional, the way that the unconstitutionality of a law works is it's not unconstitutional from the moment that it's deemed such, but rather from the moment it was created, as it was never created at all. It was always unconstitutional. So, it doesn't provide any protection. It provides no authority. It grants no office. No court is bound to obey it or enforce it, and no person is bound to obey it. Unconstitutional laws are unconstitutional. So, when they created it, in the case of the state of Washington, in 1876, they created this law that says we're not going to do a grand jury. And then they directed all their agents, being the prosecutors, to rely upon it to deprive a person of right that's guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States. That's a crime that happened. Prosecutors do not have the authority to deprive a person of a right guaranteed by the Constitution through the reliance of an inferior state law. It's called deprivation of rights of the color of law. It's Title 18, subsection 242, which states any person who, under the color of any state statute, ordinance, custom, or regulation, deprives any person of any right secured by the Constitution, commits that crime. And this is a per se crime, meaning that I don't have to prove that they intended to breach that obligation. Simply by virtue of the breach, all elements of the crime have been met because their willfulness and their knowledge derives from the promise they make. If you make a promise, you take an oath, and you swear that you'll do something and you don't do it, I don't have to prove that you intended or willfully did that because your willfulness and knowledge derives from promise you make. That's what makes public officials offenses per se. All I have to do is show you had an obligation and you didn't fulfill it, and you have already implicitly invited punishment in the form of perjury should you fail to fulfill such promise. So it's an automatic issue with them, but that is for the prosecutors. The prosecutors have no authority to rely upon an inferior state law to violate their obligations, their oath to the Constitution of the United States, and deprive people of rights that are guaranteed by it. They have no authority to do that. It's up to that prosecutor to make the decision to do the right thing and say, I'm not going to deprive this person of something they're guaranteed, right? Because I made a promise I wouldn't do that. So when that prosecutor does commit that crime and thus brings the incorrect charge and instrument, depriving a person of right guaranteed by the Constitution, by relying upon that inferior state law, when they do that and they bring it to a judicial officer, a judge within that state, that judge also has a duty and responsibility to ensure that the power that they exercise is consistent with their authority. If they choose to exercise their power based upon the prosecutor's abuse of power, who relied upon an inferior state statute to deprive a person of right guaranteed by the Constitution. Now they also are depriving a person of right guaranteed by the Constitution due to their negligence. And they have now established a conspiracy to deprive rights, Title 18, subsection 241, because of their negligence when they conspired by and between themselves and the prosecutor to advance this deprivation of rights under color law. So now we have a conspiracy that's been established because the judge didn't make sure that the proper documentation is placed. So when that judge then signs that order asking for a person to be arrested and then hands that order off to an officer and says, "Officer, please go out and enforce and arrest this person," that officer also has a duty and responsibility to ensure the power that they exercise is consistent with their authority. If they choose to exercise their power based upon the judge's abuse of power, who relied upon the prosecutor's abuse of power, who relied upon an inferior state statute to deprive a person of right guaranteed by the Constitution, that officer is also depriving that person of rights guaranteed by the Constitution under color of law. And they're also a member of the conspiracy. But when they go out and perform an arrest without having the lawful authority to do it, now they've committed a crime of kidnapping. And it is a federal offense because they're holding the victim over for ransom in the form of bail. Anytime you have ransom involved in any kidnapping, that is always going to be a federal offense, 1201. And anytime that you have a deprivation of rights under color of law that occurs in conjunction with the kidnapping, the punishment as prescribed by law is death. These are capital offenses. These are serious offenses. And we're not trying to say that's what has to happen, but I am leaving it up to them to decide. Because, if we continue to ignore this, then the people are justified in the actions that they take to correct these unlawful and seditious acts. You don't get the authority, judicial branch, to change the Constitution and to lead the people in a direction other than what they delegated the authority to do. You don't get to change the way that things are done. You don't get to remove the one thing that's in place that protects the people from you, system, right? That's the purpose of the grand jury. The purpose of the grand jury is to protect the accused from hasty or malicious charges by an overzealous prosecutor. It is the one mechanism that exists to protect the innocent from being punished. And yet today, if you were to open up the criminal procedure manual written by a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals judge, so a federal appellate judge, if you were to go into the preface, go down to paragraph number 4, what it says is most prosecutors across America agree that as much as 15% of the people in prison are innocent. But that's an acceptable deviance because our system isn't perfect. The problem that I have is that we have a system that was intended to protect the innocent, right? To make sure that innocence doesn't suffer here in America. And yet we have them stating in the criminal procedure manual that 15% of people in prison are innocent. But that's okay because our system isn't perfect. And before you call something imperfect, I would first suggest that you use it the way it was designed to be used. Don't blame it for your incompetence or laziness because you have removed the one thing that exists to protect that from happening. And then you blame the system for it. So we do have an inordinate amount of people that are innocent in prison. And most of the people that I'm picking up as these affiants, I know that they're innocent because I've reviewed their case personally. Right? I know that they're innocent because my heart tells me that this person didn't do it because I've talked to them. And you know what? The system doesn't care. They locked them up and decided that they know better how to govern the people than people know themselves. So before the system can amend the Constitution of the United States, that has to be done by an authentic act of people in accordance with the special amendment procedure of Article 5. Any other way is an act of sedition done by traitors because sedition is defined as the speaking or writing of words such as law established in order to cause disaffection to the Constitution to procure its alteration in other than lawful manner. There's one way to change the Constitution, and any other way would be an act of sedition. If you have a hard time being able to follow the rules and you need to do something different, then I would challenge you to present your case to the people of the United States, get them to agree to it, and we'll amend the Constitution in a lawful manner. If not, you're traitors. And traitors are not leaders. Traitors are not able to sit in judgment of criminals because you have no authority because you're exceeding the delegated authority that the people have given to you. And the people need to know this truth. They need to know it. And that's I'm not fighting for these people as innocents. I'm not saying they're good people. But what I am saying is that as long as government is acting unlawfully outside of the law, then what they produce is going to be unlawful. Right now today, nothing that this government is doing is lawful because they're not following the law. And as long as they don't follow the law, they can't hold these people accountable. We need to reconcile this issue, and we need to make sure that our public officials are acting consistent with the parameters that the people have given them. If they don't, they're traitors.
Sounds like this has far-reaching implications in terms of like you're starting at the ground level, and this is where the first salvo has to be fired, type of thing. But it sounds like there are much bigger, longer reaching implications to the idea that states and judges across the country are just ruling and running their own show and ignoring the Constitution.
They are. They are. You see, there's two issues. One is that the judicial or the executive branch, they started writing policy. And if you're familiar with the case Chevron, which was overturned on June 28th of this last year,
Right.
technically overruled by the Supreme Court.
Right.
What Chevron was all about was executive branch. You don't get to change the law, write policy, and then direct your agents to obey that policy, go out and enforce it. That's what Chevron was all about. Chevron was the judicial branch telling the executive branch, you don't get to legislate because all legislative power is vested in the Congress of the United States, right? That was the judicial branch pointing at them and saying, you guys have been creating policy because you don't have clarity on the law, and then you didn't go back to the branch of government that has the authority to amend it. You instead did it yourself, and that is not lawful. That was the court doing it. Now, what you should know is that Chevron was the result of me going out and serving the state attorney generals. Because what Chevron really was that the prosecuting attorneys are bringing the incorrect charging instrument. The judicial branch and the Supreme Court knows that they're going to be hearing this case. They know they're not going to get out of this. And so once you're involved in criminal conspiracy, the only way that you can get out of it is to notify your co-conspirators of your intent to no longer participate, but that must be done by some affirmative action. So what the judicial branch did there was they pointed a finger at the executive branch and said, no, you don't get to bring the incorrect charging instrument. You don't get to legislate and say it's not clear whether or not you have to have an indictment or not. And therefore, they were providing affirmative notice to their co-conspirators that they were no longer going to participate. What they were doing was they were preparing to hear this case, knowing that it's eventually going to happen, and they were thus creating that affirmative action to place the blame onto the executive branch. That's what Chevron was all about. Now the thing is that in order for this to happen, I had to get these branches of governments pitted against each other. Because I mean, how am I going to change, all this? This is nuts, right? So I had to find some way to manipulate these branches of government to force them to actually act upon the other. And what I did was for 7 years, I've been focused on the narrative that, oh, look, it's the prosecutor's fault. The prosecutors, they're the ones that are committing this crime because they're bringing the incorrect charging instrument. Judicial branch, judges, you are negligent in it, right? You are complicit in it because you were negligent. You were supposed to make sure that the proper documentation was in place, and you didn't do it, but you weren't responsible for it. Executive branch was. The prosecutors are bringing the incorrect charging instrument. And that was my narrative for 7 years, right? 7 years. Because that gave the judicial branch an out, and the judicial branch took it. They took it on the Chevron ruling, and they thus created that ruling that told the executive branch, you don't get to create law. But that's the first half, because if we want to put the Constitution back in its foundation, first off, we got to remove all the crap that the executive branch created called policy, right? And that's the first half. But the second half, to get the Constitution back in the foundation, we got to remove all the crap that the judicial branch made. And how do we make that happen, right? Well, we now have the executive branch in our back pocket because the executive branch has a choice. They can take the fall for this. They can take the blame and be responsible for, millions of people who have been deprived of rights because their prosecutors are not following the law. But the problem is that the Constitution says no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on presentment or indictment of a grand jury. Who makes the decision to hold someone over? That'd be the judge. So it is in fact the judge that commits the crime, not the prosecutor. The prosecutor can bring the incorrect charging instrument, but it's the judge that commits the crime because they make the decision to hold someone over. Therefore, the executive branch can step up and can get on our side, and they can tell the judicial branch that no, we're not going to follow your edict from 1887 any longer because you guys have been telling us to do it, right? You guys are responsible for making sure the proper documentation is in place. You guys are the ones that order the arrest. Therefore, you guys are committing crimes, and we're not going to be the fall guy for you. Or the executive branch can be quiet, accept that the judicial branch place the blame on them, not repay them for for what they did, and take the fall for it. But I don't think that they want to do that because of what I'm seeing now from from Mr. Trump administration, the DOJ memo that just went out to Grassley, where they're saying, "Hey, judges, you guys are all unconstitutional." You got, that is the start of this fight between these two branches of government, and we want this fight to come out, because what's going to happen at the end of this fight is that we're going to see the Constitution put back where it's supposed to be, because both branches of government have now been called out. Both branches of government are going to have to fight with each other, and both branches of government's going to have to determine who's going to take the fall for this, because we're not going to stop until we get the relief that the people of the United States are guaranteed. And I had to find a way to get these branches of government pitted against each other, get them fight amongst each other, because through that fighting and the blame, now we have it in an absolute public domain. Most of the public isn't aware of all this, but I sure the hell am. And again, I'm not going to stop until we get the relief that people in the United States are entitled to. And we're much closer to that than I think anyone could ever imagine, because of what's happening between these two branches of governments. They are absolutely fighting, and here we go. So yeah,
That's great, and I applaud everything you're doing. I mean, like crazy right now. I've had a couple of things come into my head as you've been talking, and I think a bunch of my listeners are probably thinking the same thing. Anybody who's been watching understands there's a gigantic difference between the previous administration and this one. Not to get too much into that, but it's great to have these things sort of, this is the pessimism in me as a citizen. Okay.
Yeah.
It's great to have these things, litigated and put out there, and then Supreme Court decisions. From where you sit and what you're trying to do, how does what you're working on and your end game prevent, let's say, a change in administration 4 years from now, and then they go back to doing the same thing?
Well, so I'm going to tell you right now that the administration is not in support of what I'm doing. Okay. It might look like it, but that DOJ memo that just went out to Grassley, where the DOJ is telling all of these ALJs, these judges, that they don't have to obey the law, or that they're unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're no longer going to protect them. I think everybody's read that. Everybody's excited about it. Everybody's like, "Oh my God, this is the answer to all our problems," and everything's going to come out, and we're going to have a just system. And that's not true, because I was trained in intelligence. When I served 8 years in the military, special operations, I got out. I went to work for intelligence for a few years. I went to work for Homeland Security and Department of Energy. I've been trained to be a human lie detector. And when you deal with liars, you have to look at words and actions. Those two things, words and actions, they must align. If words and actions do not align, you're a liar. So you can say that all these judges are unconstitutional. You can say that they're all acting unconstitutionally. But if you continue to permit your agents to go in and work with them today and yesterday, or all last week, then unfortunately, your words and actions don't align. Because if you know that the judges are unconstitutional, then permitting your prosecutors to go in and work with them over the last week, because it's been business as normal, the prosecutors, they're still prosecuting by information, still prosecuting people that have been unlawfully detained. And so, that is indication to me that your words and actions don't align. So, this administration, they could fix the problem. If they believe that those judges were unconstitutional, then you wouldn't work with them anymore. Because if you're working with someone that's acting unconstitutionally, what you're producing is unconstitutional. Why would you continue to do even one more thing with them, knowing that it's wrong? So I don't see the response or the outcome that we're looking for. And that's why I'm still out here serving. That's why I'm still out here pushing this, because I know that now we have them admitting that they're aware of that all this is true and that I'm right.
Right.
But their actions aren't showing that they're going to act consistent with the requirements. And so, I can't say how this would play out from one administration to another. But what I can say is that this administration, despite the fact that I believed very strongly that they would get behind this, because injustice has this profound effect on people, and it causes us to do things that would be inconceivable in any other context, because we've come to believe in something. It was the injustice that I experienced through my divorce. It was that led me to say, look at all these people, look what's happening, and I can't stand by and permit that to continue, because I can't unsee something. And so it was that injustice that caused me to step up and say, I'm going to put everything else aside. I'm going to step up, and I'm going to fight for my people, because I have no choice, because I cannot live in a world that's going to permit this to happen. and I'm going to stand in opposition of those that are being oppressed and the oppressor, because that's the right thing to do, because that's what a man does. That's what a husband and father does. That's the example I want my son to have in all of this, is that, for my son, a message to him would be, when you experience someone that's being hurt and oppressed, you must stand with them. You must fight for them, because that's our job as men. That's his job. And I want him to know that even though it's been 9 years since I've seen her talk to him, I want him to know that this is what he has to do. So even in my absence, I want to set that example for him. And I know that in the end, he's going to know everything I've done. He's going to know why I did it. And he's going to be very proud of me, because I will have set the example for him on how to live his life. And so, I can't say how it's going to play out in the future, but I can say that today we're going to fix it, so that my son doesn't have to fix it, your son doesn't have to fix it, and all these other children don't have to. Because what kind of father would I be if I just said, we're going to leave this for you, son. Sorry, you're going to have to deal with this. No, I may not win, but I'm going to make damn sure I'm going to take down as much so that he doesn't have to do it, because that's what my job is, husband and father. So thank you so much.
Right on. No, I appreciate that. And thank you for that very honest answer to the question too. Yeah, all through this whole thing, I've been kind of wondering what the end game is. Just in short, it's like, because there's so many things that have to take place, from the judicial reform to the alteration of the an amendment of the state constitution to, or at least eliminating a piece of it, all the way down to how it all plays out politically, which is always a complete train wreck. But is all of this really about you and your son?
100%. It is.
Yeah.
I'm not being fake at all. I'm not putting on a mask. This whole thing was about my family and me becoming who I was supposed to be, becoming the man that I want to be. And God has just blessed me with the ability to be able to help a lot of people along the way. And but this is my journey. The whole thing is about my journey. Yeah. And ever since I started this, it was to make sure that my kids knew who I was, got the example they needed, and that I was the person that I was meant to be. So 100% that's what this whole thing is about. And I'm blessed to be able to help people along the way. But no, my son, I want to create the example for him and my daughters. I want to make sure that they know that whoever they choose their heart to give their heart to, I want them to look for a man like me, right? A man that's going to give everything, that's just going to believe and give everything, to what they love, because then I'll know that when I'm gone and God's called me home and I'm no longer here to protect them and take care of them, then I can trust the men that they've chosen, because they'll be like me. And so, that's what this is about. 100%.
I understand.
And it's an honor to do it.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear that about you and your son, having not seen him for quite a while. That's got to be unbelievably tough. Can't even imagine it.
Well, so he doesn't understand the reason why, but if you can imagine, what I'm doing is very dangerous. My time in government, high level government, I know what their tactics are. And so I knew long ago that if my children loved me, that love would be used as a weapon to exploit me and exploit them, and it would hurt them. So they had to believe that I abandoned them a number of years ago. They had to, because that was the only way that I could keep them safe. And so now I'm getting to the point where we're almost done, and I'm hoping that God's going to repair the things I had to do, the damage I had to cause in order to do the things I'm doing. And I know that He will, but that'll be on His time. And so again, I want them to understand why I did this, but I did it because I had to, because that was the only way that I could protect them through what I chose to do. That was a decision I had to make, and I'll have to live with that decision. But again, when I realized that this was what was happening, we were undermining the laws of the United States the way that we were. Yeah. I didn't have choice on this, and I had to make sure that my children were protected while I went out and did the things I had to do.
Yeah. Now, in your bio, I saw a note that said that you're not getting paid to do any of this.
I don't. So I made the decision 9 years ago that I was going to do this because it was the right thing to do. And the majority of people, especially prisoners, they don't have money. They don't have that. That's the reason why their rights to be taken is because they don't have money. They can't hire someone like me to come and fight for them because they can't pay them. So I made the decision 9 years ago that I was going to do this for regardless of whether there was money or not. And I made a promise to many wives and children that I would not take another paycheck until I got their husband and father home. Um, and I'm a man of my word. So I have not taken a contract. I will not take a contract. I will work for everyone, but I will not work for anyone. I operate by donation only, and it's a difficult way to live. But by doing that, I don't have to worry about the money. That's not my passion. I'm able to keep my passion on this and make sure that I provide the best service. Because if I serve the people and they appreciate the service I'm providing, that they will make sure that I have the resources that I need to be able to accomplish the things that I'm trying to do. And again, that's a far better way of living than where I used to be. I used to make 870,000 a year when this started. I could buy anything I wanted, and but the measure of me as a man was based upon things I had. I never want to live like that ever again. So I made a decision this time. I'm going to focus on service instead of money, and I'm going to make sure that I provide the best service I can provide. And in doing so, the people will make sure I'm taken care of. I spend a lot of nights in a car sleeping, but I have a lot of people that love me for the things I'm doing, and sometimes, some days, that love is more valuable than any of the money that could have been provided. So, we're able to continue to move forward, not because we're making money, but we are able to continue to move forward because, little by little, we do get the things we need to be successful. Yeah.
It's amazing. It's an amazing story. I can't believe the stuff you're doing. And to be honest, it's hard to fathom how much you've sacrificed to get to where you are right now. Just, lots of respect for you and praying for you, man.
Thank you, brother. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I really hope that I hope you win.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I hope the people win because
Yeah.
this is not about me. This is about people, and the people deserve this win because the people deserve to be free. All people, and we deserve to live in a world that actually wants to heal the trauma so that the monster doesn't exist, rather than punishing the person for things they've done, things that happened to them. I say let's heal them. Let's look at what happened to them in their life that changed the trajectory of their life, and let's heal that so that the monster doesn't exist. We have nations that we can look at as examples: Denmark, Sweden, Norway. These are nations that right now, today, Sweden is getting ready to shut down its last prison because they chose to heal the people from the hurt that happened to them. They chose a restorative-based justice system, and now they no longer have monsters, right? They went a completely different direction. We have nations that we can look to as examples. Israel as well, and then in the kibbutz, because the kibbutz, if you were sentenced and convicted of a violent crime in the nation of Israel, they sentence you to go and live within the kibbutz because it's such a peaceful community with no record of homicide in its history, because the environment that you're in dictates what you learn. And so if we continue to live in an environment that produces conflict and crime, and because we have criminals that are leading us that don't care about the people, then don't be surprised if what we learn is going to be criminality. So the way that we have to deal with crime is from the top down. We must first ensure that we have leaders that are leading our country in a lawful direction, out of love, faith, obedience, and law, respect for the will of the people and laws they established. And until we do that, we are heading in the wrong direction because criminals leading us.
Yeah.
But once we do have leaders that are going to lead us in a good direction, that will produce a good environment, produce a good citizen. So I want the leaders to step up. I want them to act in a lawful manner because that's in the best interest of people, and obey the law. And when we do, then we will know that we're heading in a lawful direction. So this whole thing, what's going to happen is that the people are going to win because the people are going to be led by people that are going to lead us toward lawfulness instead of criminality, such as they are today.
Yeah. If any of our listeners want to help you out, help the cause, is there a way for them to do that?
Yeah. So we have Cash App, Chime, Venmo, PayPal. Those are the donation points. We don't have anything else. I can't have Zelly because I can't have a physical address because there's certain limitations that there are with the advocacy work that I'm doing if I had a physical address. So we are avoiding any sort of physical address. So I have to use those ones, but it's Cash App, Chime, Venmo, PayPal, and they're all exactly the same. It's We Shall Be Free. That's WESHALLBEFREE. We Shall Be Free. And if you want, we have all those donation points on our website. It's www.tanawah.com. That's Tanawah, TANAWAH, Tanawah.com. Up at the top, you can find the affidavit link. So if you were to want to submit an affidavit, that what we're doing now is we're collecting 500,000 criminal affidavits on behalf of affected parties throughout the country. So if you've been charged with or convicted of a felony by anyone in the state justice systems, you can go out. You can download one of those affidavits. You can fill it out. Very simple information. Doesn't matter what state you live in. You can fill it out, and then you can return it to us. Once we reach 500,000 of these, that's when we're returning to the United States Supreme Court, and I'm going to deliver it to them. And I'm going to say, are you ready to let me litigate this? Because these are 500,000 crimes that have been committed by your agents under your watch. And you can either choose to let me finally have this debate, right? And if I win, great. If I lose, great. But you either let me have this debate, or you are then permitting it to continue. You are responsible for it. And that's going to change the dynamics rather dramatically in the Supreme Court of the United States. You don't get to continue to ignore something that you know exists simply because it's too big of a deal for you to have to fix. So that's the next step. Up at the top of the website, you can download that affidavit. If you guys want to get in touch with me, there's also contact information there. You want to download a press package because you got a friend that's an attorney or a reporter. Awesome. It's all available there. But you can also go to donation links up at the top right. It says donate here, and you can go into there, and we'll have all of these individual donation points: Cash App, Chime, Venmo, PayPal. Again, I operate only on donation. No one has to pay me a cent to call me. No one has to pay me a cent for me to come visit with them and help them. But I will not act on an independent single case. I will only fight for the collective. Yeah. So that I will fight for everyone, but I will not fight for anyone. And I'm not for sale. My voice is not for sale. My mind is not for sale. I'm doing this because I need the flexibility, freedom that God provides to be able to win on behalf of all the people and not just one. So nice. Yeah, thank you.
Nice. I will have all that in the show notes for everybody. Brother, we're rooting for you and love what you're doing. And I know it's not just me when I say that we're praying for you and for your safety and for your success. So keep at it, man. Stay the course.
I will. Right. Thank you so much. We've got to head up north. So I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to be able to speak to your audience. And thank you so much, everybody.
You got it. It's my pleasure. Pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. God bless. Thank you.
Right. Folks, you've heard another fantastic episode of Power Man Podcast. I can't tell you how awesome this was. And I hope that you folks all got a chance to listen to this. I hope you'll look up the website. Everything's going to be in the show notes. Check it all out. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. This is a guy who's devoted his entire life and suffered greatly to get out what he's getting out. And, he had to go just now because he's on the road and he's moving and he's shaking. And he's fighting for something that he believes in really hard. And I think that everybody who listens to this podcast can understand that. So, folks, he's fighting for folks, and I know that we all kind of feel the same way about our own personal causes. And what he's showing us right now is that when you care about something that much, it is worth fighting for, and it's worth fighting for because you're worth it. You are worth it, and you're worth the work. You just got to believe it. Until next time.